Hi everybody and welcome to our very first TBM Tuesday virtual event series. My name is Annie Keil and I am responsible for the executive programs here at the TBM Council. And I would like to send a very warm welcome to our guest speakers, Shelia Anderson, she's the CIO at Liberty Mutual, her colleague Carolyn Bellisio, who's the technology CFO, also from Liberty Mutual, and as well as our speakers from the Maryville Consulting Group, we have Jeff Blomker, who's the Director of Technology Business Management, as well as Quinn Abraham, he's the General Manager. Last but not least, we also have our host and moderator for today, Todd Tucker, also joining us from the TBM Council. Our executives today will share some of their stories with you and talk about their experiences with TBM. And before I will hand it over to our host, Todd, I would just like to point out a few things. Even though you're all muted as of now, we really highly encourage everyone to participate, to speak up during the session. We really try to make it as interactive as possible. So you can either raise your hand and then I can unmute you if you want to speak, or you can submit any questions or feedback or any comments that you may have in the chat box. That's all from my side. I hope you really enjoyed this session. And without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Todd to kick off our very first TBM Tuesday session.
All right. Thank you, Annie. And it's great to be here, everyone. Great to see so many people online. It's just fantastic. We've got a very packed session, so we're going to jump right into things. But I'm really pleased to be joined by one of our newest board members for the TBM Council, and Shelia and her CFO of Tech. Just great to have you two on to share your experience, lessons learned, all those things. Shelia, I'm going to start with you and just a real, kind of basic question. If you could, just tell us a little bit about your vision for technology at Liberty Mutual.
Great, thank you. We're happy to be here, first of all, to share our story. Liberty Mutual is very much focused on our identity and values, first of all, as a company, so that drives how we work every day to deliver value to our company and our customers as well. We're a global company. I'll give you a little bit of insights into that. Our aspiration is to be a top three P&C insurer. You can see that there. We have two very large business lines, one focused on personal lines and one focused on commercial, as well as our corporate functions, which I have technology responsibility for the corporate functions area. You can see here our strategic technology priorities that I'm sharing with you. Strengthening our security posture is one of them. I think we all are aware of the enhanced focus needed on security. Our focus really here is on protecting our customer and employee data, keeping it as secure as possible, as well as truly finding ways to harness that data to drive value for our business and our customers. Our second technology objective is focused around migrating our workloads to the cloud. This has actually been a journey that Liberty's been on for several years. I think to date we have about 38% of our workload that has been migrated. And as you can imagine, that gets tougher with these next steps that we have. So we're continuing that journey and continuing to make progress there. The third, which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, is optimizing costs and increasing transparency. We need to ensure that every dollar that we invest in technology is then leveraged in an optimal way for our business, driving value to our business and to our customers. Our focus on TBM and the implementation of Apptio fits squarely in this, and it's helping us to achieve this goal. Our focus here is really on having conversations with our business on how do we prioritize our work, where is our technical debt in our application and infrastructure suite, and how do we invest the dollars that we have? And Apptio and TBM are helping us on that journey. And then finally, we also have a focus on continuous learning that we'll talk a little bit about today as well. We have a huge focus on aligning with our business to work seamlessly. We've actually completed our Agile Journey to 100% across our organization. You can truly see blending of business and IT teams working collaboratively across the organization to drive value for the business. We have a focus on continuous learning as part of that for our organization within IT, for our IT employees, as well as spending time educating our business partners. We actually have created a program, ExecuTech, that we'll talk about a little bit in this session as well. And our key focus there is we're wanting to ensure that we have the skills that we need for today, or expertise for today and tomorrow and in the future to help us deliver on all of the commitments that we make for our business.
All right, excellent, Sheila. You know, I'd say that last point, you know, the resources, the skilled talent that any company has is always in limited supply. So to me, TBM is always a matter of like getting people focused on the right things. It's not just about the money. So Sheila and Carolyn, I'm going to kind of pose this to both of you, and we've got a couple of slides here too, but where are you guys at with the TBM journey, and then also where are you headed?
Sure. I'll start that off, and then I'll ask Carolyn to add in as well. We actually started our TBM journey, I think, back in May of 2018 with one of the business lines that I mentioned previously, our GRM East-West market. We actually did a pilot for TBM. At that time, and for that pilot, we focused on cost transparency and the bill of IT only. We worked with a consulting partner to implement that solution for GRM East-West. We then determined that we had a need to manage our overall IT spend, and ultimately we decided on Apptio based on the success of that pilot. So that's where we ended up. We actually chose to implement many modules, I'll say 3 primarily, the cost transparency and bill of IT module, the IT planning and Agile Insights modules, and then the Cloud Insights module are called Cloudability. So this was basically a pretty large undertaking to actually implement all of those. And one of our critical needs there was basically to have a tool to help us to charge back the business on a monthly basis, provide increased transparency, and help us to manage and streamline a lot of the data. And I will say data, you'll hear a little bit here, we had a lot of dirty data. So a lot of our focus in the early days had to be on cleaning up, whether it be our asset inventory data and all of the data that we had across the organization, and then also really getting insights into various IT metrics to drive the total cost of ownership. And Carolyn, would you like to add into that?
Sure. Actually, Sheila covered most of it, but like she said, we, as an organization, we rolled out Apptio in the January timeframe. And so once we did that, we basically put the basics in and we put our allocation methodology that we were using before. And what we've been partnering with Maryville on since about March of this year is moving to the next step and really using the more robustness of the tool to help us on this journey. And so you see there's a lot on this particular slide, but basically what we're doing is we broke our hosting infrastructure type costs, our global cybersecurity and core services that we provide the organization into 4 groups. And we're on the journey right now of group 1. We actually just got buy-in for the work that we've done here. So we did a drill down into compute, storage, database, and our contact center groups. And now we're going to use those for our 2021 planning and start to charge our customer for what they use, right? And so that is really the goal that we've been working on. So we've been able to create unit costs, and we have our units of measure that we're tracking, and we've gotten validation of that. And so now we're going to actually make it into a reality, and we're going to start using this for our chargeback for 2021. And then the next phase, we'll go through the other groups. I'm sorry.
Oh, Carolyn, I was just going to clarify.
Sure.
Your role, not personally, but the organization that Sheila runs, you provide products to different business units within Liberty Mutual to support their, whether it's digital or just their core applications, things like that. Is that a fair statement?
That is fair. So it would be everything that the organization does. So Sheila's focus is predominantly on our corporate finance, our legal, and our talent organization, and the tools that we use to support that organization. And then the other business units that she mentioned are sort of like our commercial and personal units. And we have claims and underwriting and all of that. So those are the products that we're actually charging to. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Yeah,
yep, it does.
And so then we're going to move through the rest of those costs and continue to get that transparency and sort of digging deeper into those expenses. And then the other part we're doing, which is a lot of what our business and product owners are very excited about is what we're calling the application TCO. And that's where we will hopefully be able to say for our organization, what do we spend on claims processing, or what do we spend for underwriting, so that we can provide the business the information they need to understand what their technology costs, and then what levers they have to make changes with those technologies. Am I using more expensive servers? Could I be using less expensive? How much storage am I using? Is that appropriate? Does it seem like too much? And are we following retention policies? And could we get rid of some of that storage and not retain as much, et cetera? So really having the application TCO, we're super excited about. And again, this is a journey. We're going to be on it into, good portion of next year, but we've definitely gotten excellent buy-in from our business. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, I think, as far as the education that Shelia referenced and just the partnership and communication.
Absolutely. Hey, there is one thing, kind of little off script here, but in your slides, you talk about product owner financial management. Do we want to address that here? I think that's a wonderful concept.
Absolutely. I'll talk to that, and then Carolyn, I'll ask that you speak to that as well. I mentioned earlier our Agile Journey. So as part of that, we truly went into implementing something that was new for our organization, which was the concept of a true product owner for our services and products. So we have product owners from our business that actually manage all of the prioritization, the business requirements, the work that comes in. They also have a lens into the expense management side that's associated with all of the work that they're prioritizing that our technology teams deliver. Carolyn, would you like to add into that?
Yeah, this has definitely been part of the journey that we're on. And like we said, we're fairly new to using sort of, let's say, this structure. But this goes to this slide, kind of shows what I was saying before about application TCO. So our goal would be able to go up and down sort of on this slide. So the markets would look at their products like claims, be able to know what service that they're offering, claims processing, and then be able to say of those offerings, what applications support that and what that costs. And so especially an organization like ours that's over 100 years old, we definitely have a lot of technical debt. We have a lot of systems we've acquired over the years by doing, mergers and acquisitions, and just a lot of time and energy, I would say, into many different types of technologies. And now we're looking at that and saying, do we need everything? How can we have these more streamlined? And Shelia mentioned us going to the cloud. That's part of it too. How can we look at our tech debt and how can we evolve and change it? And so being able to understand those costs really help us with that journey.
Yeah, and I just love the fact that you all have talked about, who do you create accountability with? That's I think a core thing to focus on with TBM is who's going to get the information from TBM, who's going to act on it, things like that. One thing, just before we get to education, I did want to ask this too, because, Carolyn, you've been around for Liberty Mutual for a while longer than Shelia. You both talked about the fact that, Liberty Mutual was practicing many of the disciplines of TBM. TBM was in place before you did Aptio, right? Bought Aptio. What did, though, kind of TBM as you see it today, what does it bring that is new to what you were doing in the past?
Yeah, so I'll answer that one first. So I've been here over 20 years, and in some ways things have stayed the same, and in some ways things are really changing. And so we have always had a good handle on what our costs were within the technology organization, and we used to call them cost pools, but we had a compute cost pool or storage and mainframe, et cetera. But what has changed is the fact that instead of technology appearing like a black box and the business getting these charges that were big and not really explainable, we now have the tools and also the communication, and we've spent the time to educate our business on what technologies they use, how their technology impacts them, and what value they get for it. And so through that, that's really what's changed. It's that it's not technology making decisions for them. It's them being involved in the decision making. So as we have more of this information, as a business technology team, we actually can start to have better conversations about what the direction is. And if we need to get rid of technical debt because it continues to cost us more money, that means that we have to make a commitment to do that. And we just don't decide to do that as a technology group. We decide to do that as an organization. And so I think it's a conversation that's changed. It's not necessarily that we have the knowledge of what the numbers are. We already had that. It's just we weren't communicating it in a way that the business could actually consume it and understand it.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so great answer, by the way. But that kind of begs the question of your efforts to educate people in your organization. Shelia, you had talked about this specifically. Could you talk a little bit more about that with this group? Who are you educating about the business, and what are you teaching them?
Yes, and this actually came as an ask of our enterprise CIO working with our business. They realized that it would be more beneficial to actually understand more about technology than they knew, so that it wasn't that scary topic, and there was a greater understanding of when my technology partner comes to me and shares that this change or this new solution is going to cost a certain amount of money, how do I really tell what that is and how significant it is to my business? So we actually came up with the idea of developing a program. We actually call it Execu-Tech, and it's where we're focusing on driving continuous learning for our business leaders in current technologies, new technology initiatives, our challenges, emerging trends, and basically to enable a different level of collaboration. You'll hear that a lot from both Carolyn and me during this discussion. It's all about changing the conversation, and how better to do that than to ensure that your technology partners are very familiar with the language and what all those things mean. So we created this program called Execu-Tech. And what that basically does, it focuses on a couple of key foundations. We've got different subjects. So if you could think about everything related to software development, software fundamentals, applications fundamentals, infrastructure fundamentals, data fundamentals. We have a focus on security education, machine learning, AI, digital, all of the different pieces of technology. We've developed this program to educate our business, helping them to understand when we talk about technical debt, what does that really mean? How do we make decisions in the business that impact technical debt or create technical debt? And so it has really helped to change the game and focus on continuous learning. The way that we roll this out as an organization, my team, I actually have a training and education team that creates the content in partnership with all of our markets, GRM, GRS, as well as my corporate team. And then we actually use individuals from the IT team to lead this education discussion. So part of the value of this is really not only are we educating, but at the same time we've got IT leaders, IT practitioners at various levels in the organization in a session, half day or full day session with our business. And we actually tailor it to each of those business organizations that we're working with. So for a GRM or a GRS, we actually bring real life scenarios from their business and we tailor it to their scenarios. So it's real, meaningful, and there's fantastic conversation that comes out of it. So that's one thing. The second thing that we've actually started this year to kind of aid this along also is something that my team created, a focus on application health. And we're mirroring this education along with what we call application health and our focus with Aptio to blend a total story with our business. So our focus on application health is basically, we've created a process and a technology, a dashboard, so to speak, to measure the health of our applications and make it meaningful. We survey our business. We survey for the usability and the value criticality. We have a technical assessment that's part of that. Is it aligned to an architectural roadmap? Is it planned? Are we remediating it? And so then in a graphical way, we can have a different discussion with our business also on what is that technical debt? Here it is on a graph. Here's how much money. That's where the Aptio tie will come in. Here's a feed from Aptio that's showing you how much you're investing in this technology that you're saying you're not getting a lot of value from. So we need to either invest in it and sunset that application, or we need to start revisiting the priority of our investments. So all of these things combined are helping us to have a fantastic conversation with our business to drive business value and to put our investments in the right place going forward, where they're seeing the value.
Excellent, excellent. So Shelia, a lot of great lessons there. I launched a poll for all of you. If you could just respond with, who do you educate in your organization on TBM principles and things like Shelia just described. Shelia, one thing I'm going to comment on too is, because you said something that I think is really important for people in your position and Carolyn's position, et cetera, and that is you have to market what IT or tech does for the business. And you have a brand for the education, the executech. Clearly, you're using that. I know marketing sometimes has a bad reputation. It's thought of as like advertising, but it's a really crucial, I think, discipline within this realm. And so we shouldn't shortchange it. There's a lot of lessons we could take from how do we, really shape perception, behavior, et cetera, within technology and within the business. So I love it. It's just terrific. I'm going to let the poll go for just a little bit. They're still coming in. But while that's happening, why don't we actually, let's see, we opened a poll. Let's go to the audience because there's some really good questions from the audience. And I've gotten several through just chat. Let me go real quick. I saw one that I especially wanted to ask. Here it is from he or she asks, how and why did you convince yourselves to make strategic investment in cloud transformation while continuing to maintain current data center operations costs? What's the end state that you're looking to achieve? That sort of thing.
Yes, honestly, I'm relatively newer at Liberty. I've been here 3 years. Our enterprise CIO, I think, did a fantastic job envisioning early migration to the cloud from what I've seen. So that's one of the things that I saw coming in as a leader compared to other organizations. I think Liberty had really started early on that journey. I think one, to tie in with all of this messaging around how do we control our costs, I think that was a big driver to be able to manage more closely your costs and turn it up and turn it down. So for example, if you have those dev servers that you're not needing all the time, you can manage those while in the cloud and turn those things down so you can manage that cost a lot more effectively and efficiently. And we've actually seen that. It is also helping us to be able to exit some of our data centers. So we have strategies around that. And of course, one of the challenges that we all manage as part of this, and Carolyn can talk to this a little bit, is you do end up seeing a bubble of cost where you're investing in migrating to the cloud, which is one of those things that we are seeing the value. However, you also are still going to see the runoff of your legacy investments. And that's one of those things that I think is very important to have transparent conversations with your business so you can separate those two things so they can see that value line that's being driven by the cloud, and then they can also see that you have, like anything else, until that chair is taken by somebody else, that investment and cost is still yours. So you need to be able to show that and have that conversation. Carolyn, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I would just say when we decided to do it, like Shelia said several years ago, and we really created a vision for that. And we had a manifesto at the time that really outlined what our vision was as an organization. Part of it was agile and part of it was cloud. And part of it was really to have the flexibility, right? So we had multi, data centers around the world. And like Shelia said, it is a big effort for us to be able to close one that we're closing right now in Redmond, Washington. And so we really had to focus on that and decide that over time, we don't believe that being in the data center business is where we want to be. We believe that, that being in the cloud is more flexible, more nimble. But I will say, besides what Shelia said about the cost of having that bubble, we also have to constantly watch our cloud costs and make sure that they don't get out of hand, and that we're, when you say, spin things up and down, you have to, there is work and diligence that you have to do with that. And over time, we're getting better and better at it, but you can't, lose track of it along the way.
Yes, I think that's a key message on that. It's really even more important to watch your cloud cost, depending upon even how, like for example, we designed a high transaction volume application, and we started seeing those costs increase. So we had to make some changes based upon how we were managing our cloud environment and infrastructure as compared to some of these new applications that have a lot of Lambda functions that get invoked, et cetera. So there's a substantial amount of management that you have to think about that changes as a result of that cloud movement.
Yeah, definitely. It's a faster cadence watching that than your typical TBM monthly, maybe even quarterly kind of cadence.
Right.
And there's a lot more automation you can apply to it to help control those costs and things like that. So I think it brings both, you know, sort of threats and opportunities, if you will, for managing. But yeah, Shelia, you have to have that discipline and those processes
Right.
and tools in place, without a doubt. All right, fantastic. Let's see, we have the poll come back. By the way, it's actually fairly promising in some regards, in that there's, you know, a fair amount of education across all the roles, but it is definitely lacking in certain areas. Actually, some are kind of surprising, like senior finance leaders, senior business leaders. I would have expected higher education of them around TBM principles and so forth. Obviously, take it for what it is, but, you know, I think the key that we want to drive home is that education is really important and should be an important part of your program.
And one
okay.
point note there, just as we called it Executech, we really started with the first level one leaders in the organization, and the whole point behind that was it's important for them to understand it. And once we did that education, they started to push their teams to understand as well. And so we really got that buy-in at the very top of the organization, and that was crucial for us.
And we got a lot of great feedback, because there would be sessions where you would have senior executives who possibly haven't spent a lot of time in technology saying, Shelia, I have no clue and no concept of what you're saying, so help me to relate it to something. And so we would use that feedback to actually change some of the language and how we were educating as well. So it was fantastic. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, I think anytime you do education, especially with a group that's all from your company, it's going to be a little workshop-y too. You're going to get a lot of feedback, a lot of discussion. You'll hear complaints, you know, or concerns, let's call them. It's all good. Yeah. So, all right. Hey, so I want to kind of keep on the thread of some questions. We got some other good questions coming through, and honestly, they may be a little ahead of where we're at in kind of the discussion guide, but if you both are okay, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna go to some of these. So Brian is asking, how do you manage the bill of services with the variability of those cloud costs? And how do you manage the expectations then with your internal business partners, i.e. those that are ultimately paying the bills?
Sure. I'll talk a little bit about managing that with the customer. I think Carolyn can also add to this. And it is a little bit ahead, but I'll go ahead and talk to it. We actually typically, almost all of our CIOs do what we consider to be quarterly business reviews with our business. One piece of that review is also our expense or financial review. So they're seeing that on a quarterly basis. So they're very accustomed to us having those conversations. I think the trigger that you're talking about that is going to be a big switch for us is actually to be seeing more of that volume-based change on a quarterly basis. And so that will be changing our processes as well and expectations around that. Carolyn, would you like to talk through some of how we're doing that today?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, so we've changed, and this kind of goes to the education too, is that we have created this year a meeting, sort of a steering committee meeting, we could call it, where we have our CIOs and our enterprise CIO and all our CIOs, as well as the CFOs of every business line, as well as key executive business leaders. And we have brought this group together. We're going to meet quarterly, and we've only had our second meeting actually as of last week. And one of the things that this team is focused on is cost optimization as well as cost transparency. And we're really sharing and educating with them what we're doing, how we're doing it. It's, again, like I said before, it's not about IT doing something to their business that they support. It's us collaborating and trying to educate along the way. So what I said before about the work we're doing with Maryville is that we're creating, these are unit costs, this is information, and we're sharing with these senior level executives, if you want to save money, these are some things that you can do, but you need to also take commitment and responsibility for these costs. These costs don't just happen to you. It's because you've built applications. You want the applications to have certain functionalities. If those functionalities aren't valuable, then maybe you don't need to have all the bells and whistles that you might have that cost money. And so the more that we can tear away those layers of that onion, to be able to show them that information, the better those conversations are. So we're actually having these meetings with the business and getting them engaged and actually excited. So part of what Shelia just said is we've agreed with the business that for the first time, from an actuals perspective, we're going to charge for consumption on a quarterly basis. Right. So they are a little nervous about what does that variability mean to me. So they like the idea, if I reduce the number of servers that I have, my costs will go down, right? They like that idea. They're afraid of, what if I bring in a bunch of new servers, or I ask for a new service, or I have more compute time on our mainframes and I'm using more MIPS, then what's going to happen? Like how high is my bill going to be, right? So I feel like not having a buffer is a little scary, but we've sort of said, trust us, let's go through this for the first, rev of it for next year. We're doing like a, MVP, minimum viable product, and so we'll see, we're going to see how it goes, but at least they're aligned with us. We didn't just change the allocation methodology without engagement with them. We're actually bringing them along with us. So it's exciting, a little scary for everybody, but we're,
yeah.
Yes, and we actually had an example that we just reviewed in our last meeting where our corporate charges, actually we identified some charges that I did not have in corporate that were allocated directly to corporate. Because of that, though, it showed a little bit of a difference in how that would be charged back, where one business unit previously was probably taking more of it than they should have. So that's a very simple way of us showing without having a significant dollar impact of how this will work in the future. So we're already seeing that we're having those discussions, and each of them realize that there'll be some give and take. So sometimes you're going to see this as an advantage, sometimes it will disadvantage you, but the point is we're getting the cost allocated where they need to be, and then you can control them going forward and the decisions that impact those costs. Yeah.
Which is, we talked about the word levers or levers, depending on which you choose. But, that's a very important concept here. And Carolyn, for both of you, like how have you kind of created those levers? You've hinted at a lot here, but I think it's easy to say, oh, we're going to create them for everything and make it overly complicated, or at the same time not do the right thing to create some degree of control and accountability. So just kind of throwing it back on this topic, what kind of levers, what's your approach to doing that here?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, and again, we're just starting this, but I'll just give the example in our compute space, right? So we looked at, what kind of servers do we have, and do we have a general purpose server that costs, let's pretend it costs $300, and then there's a jumbo server that's more complicated and that costs $1,000, right? When we start to provide to not just the product owners, but also the technology managers, this is how you're configured, this is what you're paying for, and is that the price you want to pay for these things that you're getting? And they start to see, that whole concept of having a rate card, similar to what AWS or Azure might have when you purchase from them. Once they start to see some of that, they might say, well, how come I'm on jumbos? Do I need to be on jumbos? Like, what's the benefit of a jumbo? So they start to ask some of those questions they might not have asked before. And to Sheila's point about the corporate group, so there was more storage in there that before we weren't able to figure out what group it belonged to. So, legal having a lot of storage, that makes sense, right, to you when you think about that group. But then what does that mean? What are they going to do now? Now that they have that information, they might not like the cost of the bill, but then they can say, oh, Is there something I can do about that? Can I change that? Can I change where I'm storing the data, how I'm storing the data, how much data I'm storing? So it just brings up, and that's why I said before, I think conversation is so important, because the conversation and the constant educating, oh, well, let's dig a little deeper into that, has a benefit in a different way. So yes, you might be paying more, but you actually can influence that for the next time around, right? And that's why I said that actual consumption quarterly, they actually will see a benefit if their costs go down, if their units go down, excuse me.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think there's also other pieces of this too, not just tied to infrastructure costs, but for example, in one of my business areas, we had an area that, because of the visibility into the unit cost and combining that with our application health view, we were able to see an area that was driving substantial costs inside of that department because of how they were managing, for example, calls coming in and support for a specific area. When we really dug into that, and our business partners saw that they were spending a tremendous amount of money on what could easily be automated if they just made a little bit of investment in that. So it absolutely switched the conversation, and we were able to show them, you're going to invest this fixed one-time cost, and it's taking out all of this recurring cost that you really weren't even paying attention to because we didn't have the right visibility into it. So it leads to a lot of different conversations like that.
Yep. Yeah, and I hope as you guys move to a product owner cost management model that those product owners start thinking that way, right? Like if we invest today, we can take out costs tomorrow, we can rationalize underpinning technologies today and streamline what we do. I think that accountability combined with the knowledge and things like that, you can drive some really good outcomes. Hey, I'm going to pull Quinn and Jeff, you guys into the conversation because you guys have the benefit of working with a lot of clients and like Jeff, you and I visited some of them together, and that collective wisdom. When we talk about levers, I think this is one of the hardest things to get right. What have you guys seen? What works here when it comes to creating levers, that accountability both within the business and maybe even within IT?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Todd. I think a couple things are important. First, the context of what you're charging back with, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all. Some organizations are very ready to go with an IT services-centric chargeback where you're thinking about what are we charging for compute, what's the optionality for compute. Other organizations, depending on kind of where they're at and that product transformation, may be ready to charge out at the product level and still have the allocation details that are, as detailed as a compute item, but it's a product owner that's actually representing that back to the business and jointly with IT and finance. I think in terms of some of the challenges that come up with levers, it gets back to a lot of the financial constraints that come from a corporate finance perspective, right? So when you think about stranded costs, hey, we're going to change the allocation measure or metric, and that may lead to us not charging a business unit the full cost, or we might disincentivize some behavior by further burdening something like a mainframe. When you kind of think about cost versus price or build a plan or true ups, all of those financial metrics become something that need to be agreed upon up front so that when you're going to each service owner, IT service owner or product owner, those dynamics are kind of set so that you can really have the right context on how fixed variable or how influenceable costs or stranded costs are going to end up influencing business decisions and what we're able to do there. I think, Quinn, just in terms of Liberty Mutual, what might be good to talk about is really that investment that you all are making with service and product owners to educate them on those different optionalities and how we actually represent that back in the Bill of IT.
Yeah, so I'll just go quick here because Todd, it looks like you have a nice poll to get into here in a second. But I think the big thing that we're doing with Carolyn and Shelia, a nice job at Liberty, and is really just not trying to boil the ocean for what we're focusing on for product costing and putting in a Bill of IT. Sometimes people just want to put a rate against every chair, keyboard, storage gigabyte on a bill, but this is where the partnership between TBM and finance is really beneficial, because Carolyn and Shelia have been able to focus on specific areas that are going to present the most value back to consumers, and then work with those product owners for them to understand what is actually driving cost for their areas. That way, if somebody does turn consumption down for a server, storage, contact center agent, whatever it is, you have good visibility into when those costs will start to go away or move over time. So.
Excellent. Again, it's a challenging area. So I've got the poll on what levers or what types of levers do you expose, and again, you know, there's kind of a low degree of exposure for the levers, at least that are defined here. Again, take it for what it is, but the highest is the ability for BUs to influence. Oops, let me stop it and share it. But the highest is the ability to for business units to influence app TCO. In other words, they're being engaged in those conversations, I got to imagine, and having the ability to influence those things. But there's some other things, you know, like the ability to scale up and scale down on a monthly basis just isn't there, or even on a quarterly basis. And I think that's a real challenge when you've got central tech like you do, Shelia, and what you have, you know, other than, you know, public cloud, and even probably a lot of it's fixed cost. And so it can be a real challenge here.
Yes, and I think, you know,
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, being an area of the business that is largely shared with the corporate functions. For example, we actually have a lot of large investment initiatives right now globally, where we're globalizing finance functions, we're globalizing our talent functions. So there is a lot of discussion internally around how do we manage those shared costs back to our business. We try to allocate them as directly as possible. Where for example, we're implementing a finance initiative for GRM East West. We try to implement and allocate those costs where we can back directly. Because of where we are in our TBM journey and what we've chosen to focus on in the beginning, we're focusing largely on those that bucket of infrastructure costs and others that you've seen us and heard us talk about, and that's just because of where we are in our journey. The application TCO work and all of that, we still have a lot to do. I think the other piece of this is tying in the business value story. We've attempted to do some of that with our application health approach. We still have work to do on that, and I think that's part of maturing through your TBM journey as well.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, I've been kind of looking through the questions and kind of for themes, and one of the themes here is about the sort of the business case to even do this. And I'll say this, we've done some surveys recently, like after the executive event back, whatever, a month or so ago, and one of the things that it revealed is a lot of organizations don't feel like they have the necessary executive support, i.e. Shelia, you, and budget and resources, which kind of surprised me because the group we had on that call was, I would say, you know, lean toward more mature TBM deployments and so forth. So I was a little surprised by it, but it told me that this continues to be a challenge. So I've got a question from Bomsey, another from Rick, and a couple others that are really asking about the justification. Bomsey asks about the cost-benefit analysis that you performed prior. Rick is asking about, you know, hey, if things like technical debt are a big challenge, how did you end up prioritizing, you know, TBM as well? And I think these are really good questions. Could you comment on what was that sort of driver? How did you justify it?
Carolyn, I'll let you go back to that. I really, from the very beginning, I think Carolyn has been more involved early in the journey, so I'll let her talk a little bit to that, and then I can talk to your second question.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm ruining a question for the future, Todd, but one of the things I think that helps us with this is the way that we're structured. So even though I'm the CFO of the technology organization, I worked in technology for many years, but about 3 years ago, I moved into corporate finance. So now I'm on both the technology leadership team and the corporate finance team. And so just having me in a role that can communicate both ways through the business, wearing my finance hat and wearing my technical hat, has really been beneficial for us as an organization, for us to have the kind of partnership that we have. So I'm sort of the spokesperson a lot of times that goes back to the CFO community and goes back to the overall, you know, our corporate finance, our comptroller and our CFO for the whole company to explain some of the things that we're working on. And so when Shelia just mentioned, you know, we're doing a very large transformation of our finance systems. We created business cases. I'm sure a lot of you have done this. One of the hardest thing about a business case is it's not hard to put it together. It's not hard to show the value. It's hard to show, especially when it's multi-years, to prove that you actually received the value and you reduced the cost that you thought you were going to reduce. And you really need someone to follow up with that and to hold people accountable on all sides. So you might say, we're going to change our financial systems. We're going to be more automated. We're going to have less manual feeds. We're going to have you know, state-of-the-art actual system that we're using instead of a very old financial system. All of that is great in theory, but then you have to follow up. And so one of the things that I'm sort of work back and forth, like I said, between technology and finance is making sure that we follow through with the commitments that we've made. So if we think that there's going to be cost reductions because we're going to have technical costs that we're turning off, we have to constantly go back to what the business case that we created. It always changes, it always evolves, and things change, but to go back and prove that we actually did see those savings, because it is very difficult for the business units to have to pay for a new finance system when they have all these other systems, like for us, like claims and underwriting, that really their day-to-day are related to what their customers need, and they want to, you know, be digital and all of those types of things. You know, for them to have to pay multi-million dollars for a system, it's a challenge. So we have to prove to them over time, and that's not just technology going back and showing, hey, these are all the things we shut off. Oh, now you're in the cloud, you're more efficient, you're using less storage, but it's also, as a business, we no longer have to do functions manually anymore. We don't need people to you know, do manual input. We now have bots that'll do that, or other things that will do that, that will support us. So I think that one of the nice things is the role that I play between the two organizations has helped us sort of facilitate some of those conversations overall.
Yeah. Right, and I would say the challenge of the shared component of it is just that. I think we can always identify our technology cost equation when it gets down to making those hard decisions in the business around impacting business process or structure. Those are things that, frankly, take quite a bit more time as we work through it.
Yeah, yeah. But those, Shelia, you'd probably agree that those changes, they're good for more than just TBM, right? It's like there are things you do for TBM, but it's not, the benefits exceed just that direct usage. Yeah.
That's right.
Like investments in data. Yeah.
Yes, the focus on TBM just gives you a little bit more of that visibility so that you can actually identify some of those opportunities, whether it be to drive additional value or to take out costs. I think we have examples of both of that, and it enables that. So that's part of the story, I think, when you look to invest in a TBM journey for your organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I always say this, like, I'm not a big believer that you build a business case for TBM. You have a vision and a strategy for your business and for your tech or IT department, et cetera, and you understand how TBM fits into that. And you justify it based on that vision and strategy, which probably can be justified based on financial benefits, right? So, yeah.
And this is, if you think of it, I shared our priorities in the beginning, and it definitely lines up to our alignment of business and technology and in optimization of our work and our investments and improving that transparency. So we've had those goals, and this is helping us to achieve those, and it's a journey. It will be a multi-year journey.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Very good. And I'm kind of looking at time. We got about 12 minutes left. Carolyn, I'm going to go back to you for a moment. You kind of talked about like changing the way that you guys operate, and we had talked about like, you know, changes that finance operates. You're in finance, changing the way finance operates to you know, adopt TBM, et cetera. What would you say about that? Like, what kinds of things have you had to do on the finance side to embrace TBM?
So I think what I mentioned before about the structure has made a difference. So when I think I saw, you know, or you said, you know, investing in being able to do TBM overall as an organization, how are you able to get somebody to say, oh, we want to commit to that? And I think a lot of it has just been this constant communication between me and my other peers, as far as the CFOs on the business side go, to have those conversations so that they're supportive of the things that we're trying to do and accomplish. And also, I think it's about them wanting to have visibility and transparency, and through this journey, they're getting more of that. You know, it's the, you know, again, I said this in the beginning, it's charge us for what we're using. Like, we can understand the charges if you can explain them to us in a way that is meaningful to us. And so we really have to break that down so that we can have those conversations. But I also think it's because our finance, we're making sure that our finance teams, whether they're aligned to businesses or, and myself being in the technology group, are communicating with the executives about these different challenges that we might have. And so I think it's about the buy-in and the support and the communication and just the consistency of the message, and the follow-through.
Carolyn, there's a couple questions in here, maybe even more. We got a lot of questions, but one is asking about, you know, how do you charge for overhead costs? Another is asking about, you know, how do you agree on the unit costs and TCO, which I think also gets into like rates. You have a slide that we have in the deck on chargeback. Would you mind just talking about like the kind of the process that you're moving to and what that looks like, and would it be helpful if I showed that slide?
Sure. So this goes back to what I said before about having that, the new group that we pulled together with the executive leadership to explain some of this. I definitely won't drain the slide because it takes me a while every time I have to communicate this. But the whole concept behind this was to be very clear. We have, as many companies probably do, a robust planning process every year, and it's probably more tedious and painful than it needs to be. But we're trying to make that a little bit more streamlined. But one of the keys that we have found is we need to make sure that the business understands like what is happening, what we're changing, what's staying the same, et cetera. So when I showed you that slide in the very beginning with the work that we've been doing with Maryville, we knew that there were going to be changes to our 2021 planning. So we went through and I've explained to them, this is what's going to be the same, this is what's going to change. So this is the current methodology, this is the future methodology, very specific about the dates that things are going to happen on, very specific about what to expect, when things are going to, when the cutoffs are going to happen, how we're handling recovery. So some of you might be wondering, you know, when I said before that we were going to charge for what they're using on a consumption basis quarterly, it does make you say, hey, what if you had some fixed costs in there? How can you charge them less if your fixed costs are still going to remain? We made the conscious decision with a lot of conversations with Quinn about what the right thing to do there was. And we felt like in order to get the organization to really embrace this, that we actually would handle the recovery at our corporate level. So if we, you know, if one group gets a reduction and we still have some fixed costs, but another group uses more and they're going to pay more, we're hoping that a recovery isn't going to be a big, large variance at the end. But we did agree that we're not going to penalize one group for something that another group does. And so it might mean that the rates change the following year, but we've been very clear about it. And so what this just shares is us having this conversation across the business. And this is one of the things that I think is key in a large organization like ours. We're trying to make sure that the message is consistent and articulated the same way across the organization. So it's not as if as a corporate finance group, we just say, hey, this is what the rules are. We actually are working with the teams, bringing the teams together across our business and having the same conversation. And our hope is that there won't be confusion across the board. Oh, nobody told me that. You changed the rules and I wasn't aware of that. And how come you're charging me this? Like, they all know. And one last point I'll just add to that. With the work that we did with Quinn, we went through our metrics and we explained, like, we took somebody who's a product owner, let's say of compute on the technology side, and said, do these units make sense? Is this does this make the most sense for a type of unit that we would charge for? And we got buy-in on that. And then we got validation of the information that we had, and we've shared it. So is it pristine and perfect? It isn't yet, but we're working on it, and we're holding the people in the organization accountable, not just finance saying, oh, this is what we're doing to you, but it's the groups are accountable to look at their data and make sure it's right. And if it's not right, then we need to communicate that and talk about it. So I think, like I said, it goes back to communication and the collaboration.
Yeah, fantastic. You're having to bring people along this journey. It's not just you guys going through the journey. And again, what I love here too, with you both, is that the partnership between finance and tech, in your case, is really, really strong here. And that cannot be overstated. It is super critical. We've seen it too often where that wasn't the case. Let's see, we got about 5 minutes left. I wanted to, I see a question from Priyu. Priyu, it's very good to have you on. It's been a long time since you and I've talked, but I want to ask your question. You're asking, how do you handle situations where the BU decides to take action to reduce consumption, but there is no net reduction to the company, which I think is very much in the theme, Carolyn, of what you described, like they retired a bunch of servers, but maybe there was no run rate on these, but those situations where the decision by the business to reduce leaves you basically with a variance. What do you do in that case?
So this is what we're going to see how this goes, right? But part of what I was saying before is we did make a decision that we would allow them to have a reduced expense, right? So if they happen to be on a server that has no more depreciation expense or anything like that, they still would receive a reduction. And that would just cause us, when we look at our everything the following year, we set the rates. What we've agreed to is we're going to set the rates annually, and only consumption moves. The rates don't move during the year. And so it might mean that next year that there's less to spread it out across if our units change. We did do some analysis about how some of those units are changing year over year. So we're prepared for, we don't believe that there's going to be wild swings. But on the other side of that, because we are moving to the cloud, some of those costs are never going to come back into the unit. It's not like, oh, we're not on that server because we're buying a new server. It's like, we're not on that server and we're never going to use another server again. So what our general manager of our hosting organizations explains is there's these tiers of costs with hosting expenses. So you're going to go for a long time. For us, you go for a long time. Now we're going to evacuate one of our data centers. So then all of a sudden your fixed costs go down as an organization, and everybody benefits from that until the next time that you tier down again. So those costs aren't always have lots of variable costs, but when you get rid of fixed costs, all the costs go down in a big chunk. So we've been trying to communicate that once we get to that certain level, then all of a sudden you'll see a lot of costs go down. And so that is one of the challenges of this, that you're trying to sort of balance and manage it.
Yeah, fantastic. Hey, so I probably didn't manage time well enough here. We're at 2 minutes still, but I do want to do the one last question that we had talked about. And before I go to that, I just want to let everybody know that after today's session, we'll follow up with you all. One thing we're going to follow up with immediately is a survey. We'd love for you to take the survey just to help us evolve and improve this program, get your feedback, et cetera, understand your needs better. So please it's like a 5-minute survey. It'll be super quick, I promise. So you'll get that very shortly. And then we'll also keep you obviously posted about the upcoming TBM Tuesdays. So last question, which here's the order I'm going to go in. So Jeff or Quinn, I'm going to start. If one of you could take the question, give us some perspective on this, and then we'll go Carolyn and Shelia. But the question is this, just what advice do you have for industry peers or folks that you work with? What advice do you have for them regarding TBM? So Jeff, Quinn, starting with you.
Sure, I can go ahead. So I think it's important to come back to those stakeholder roles that we talked about earlier today. It's business consumers, it's finance, and it's IT. And I think it's important whether you're scoping the initial phases of TBM or whether you're 2-3 years in to remember to document the different problem statements that each group has, theme those into different TBM capabilities, and put yourself in a position to defend your roadmap. I know that TBM is, it's a challenge, right? I mean, it's transformational in nature, so it doesn't come without the friction. So I think it's really important to continue to interview those stakeholder groups, get the common aspects of those, and then start talking about what the solutions are that you're going to deliver, and really make sure that each group, you could be talking to finance, but make sure that you're bringing IT and business consumers perspectives in. You got to deal with that matrix, but ultimately it's critical to get some documentation there so that you're not constantly fighting an uphill battle. And I think that Liberty Mutual has done a great job of that. It's been very exciting to see the sponsorship that Shelia and Carolyn have built, right? I think that we're all kind of hearing this. I know that there's several other companies out there wishing that they had the type of sponsorship that you guys have built. So I think that's some of the efforts that you guys have put in laid the foundation for a really successful program. And I know that a lot will learn from this as well, which is exciting.
Terrific. Thanks, Jeff. Carolyn.
Yeah, so I think I've said it several times, but it's about the clear, honest, concise communication, collaboration across the groups. And one of the things that we have found helpful, like working with Maryville, was also asking the questions, what do other companies do? How do others handle this? Even if you're able to get, benchmark information about how your costs are the same or different from other companies. And we found when we created our sort of unit rates and such, like I said before, we measured it against, hey, this is what AWS, this is how they structure theirs, so that like it gives more credibility to sort of what you're doing and how you can say it's similar to externally as well. I think that helped us along with this as well. And I do think having the sort of internal partnership and people having ownership and taking ownership has really been really key for us, where people feel responsible for the costs. Instead of it being done to them, they feel like they can influence and change it.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, Shelia.
Yes, and I'll wrap up probably with a summary of all of this. I think the business, IT alignment and engagement that we all have talked about, the education is critical. And then I would also say having a regular forum with your business. We have a number of them at the CIO level, and then in our cross-market meeting that we talked about, where we're actually having very productive conversations about the changes that I call it kind of a 30-day look back, 30 days forward, looking back at what's happened, but also talking about what you can expect that's coming up. And I think you can get some small wins as you go through that and identify those and share those in those regular updates with your business.
All right, excellent. Great advice. Speaking of open forum, that's what this is supposed to be about. I know it's short, we get this very quick, but this was fantastic. I really, really appreciate you all. Jeff, Quinn, thank you for sponsoring and supporting this and all the great work you do in the community. Carolyn, Shelia, thank you for your leadership. Shelia, especially having you on the board, it's been just a breath of fresh air having you there, so it's fantastic to have you on. Annie, thanks for driving this and driving me and the rest of us. Been great. So I think with that, we'll call it to a close. Annie, any last point we need to make?
No, thank you so much. It was just wonderful to see the participation of the audience. I'm really sorry if we didn't get to all of the questions, but we will follow up with you all. And thank you all. You were fantastic speakers. Thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Talk soon.